as must-sees and must-haves. To start us off tonight, NBC News correspondent Colleen Dominguez on the craze that has now hit Hollywood.
More than a game.
Anybody know how to play this? How to get to the next level?
Bones ready, a friend with bones too. So play those crazy bones, that's what you gotta do. Kids go crazy for crazy bones.
Sonic 2 handles stubborn stains. Embarrassing bald spots, no problem. It even slices and dices, makes thousands of julienne fries.
The 1990s. It's a decade of flashy neon colours, baseball caps, pop music, video games, and toyetic toys, all bundled together with extreme attitude. Growing up, I was spoiled for choice on the type of media to consume during a lazy afternoon. Whether it be playing Toe Jam and Earl with a friend on the Sega Mega Drive, watching the game show Crystal Maze with the family, or playing with Pogs. Or is it Collect Pogs? How can you play Pogs? What was even the point of that? It was the sort of time that would fuel a young kid's imagination. Back then, I was obsessed with the show called The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. A kids show written by sci-fi authors and animated by the Japanese animation studio TMS Entertainment. Yes, that studio. In a way, it was my first exposure to the world of Japanese animation, and eventually not the last. Of course I loved every second of it, barring the fact that it was a show from the mid-80s. Around that time, British telly tended to air quite a few reruns from the 80s. We had shows like Thundercats, Transformers, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wait, what? Oh, right. I'm sorry, I meant Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Even though I remember having some of the toys, I really couldn't get into them as much as everyone else did. The closest we had to them in the 90s were Biker Mice from Mars or Street Sharks. Yeah. But forget about all that. The 90s was the era of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. Rugrats, Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab, and Captain Planet. Yes, I had the toys from that show as well. And, oh god, we had James Bond Jr.? Wait, I remember having the toys from that show too, what was wrong with me? But nothing really grips me until some more Japanese imports landed on our shores. It's the 90s, so of course I'm talking about the 1993 classic Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And to an extent, Masked Rider. Oh god, what is that? What's going on here? Why? Oh no. No, stop. Please watch the original if you can. I remember being completely enthralled by those shows. The cool suits, the special effects, and the giant robots. My parents went through hell trying to find the Megazord just in time for Christmas. I remember being blown away when I unwrapped my presents to find this huge box containing the titular robot. I had fond memories combining the Zords together with my dad. But at the time, I don't think my parents had any idea what kind of seed they planted in me. And then, towards the end of the 90s, a little game from the land of the rising sun would hit our shores. A game by the name of Pokémon. Of course, I don't really need to go into the whole history behind it. I'm pretty sure you clicked on this knowing full well what Pokémon is. Especially when there's a whole list of videos covering that very subject. Literally everyone and their mother has heard of it, with kids everywhere wanting to become a Pokémon trainer.
His dream is to become a Pokémon master.
Pokémon? What? Wait, what? It's made such a big impact on our culture that you'd be surprised to learn who would jump aboard the Pokémon train.
Pikachu, what's up, dude? I like those red and yellow colors. Those are my colors. You know, that could be gimmick infringement, brother, but that's okay. You're my buddy. I think Pokemon is so popular because it's pure entertainment for the kids. It's a very positive form of entertainment. It teaches them values and how to stay focused and team play.
From wrestlers of the past to anime girls of the future.
Not with your puny power. I'm gonna beat you the frick up.
says that to a kid? Like, what? What?
They fried up my enemies while we were in the war.
Bro, I'm like 12.
But with its massive success, there's bound to be a few companies that want to latch onto its popularity. I'm talking bootlegs, of course. Ah yes, the most memeable merchandise on the market, and I'm sure you've seen your fair share of them. But what if I were to tell you that as a kid, I managed to get a hold of a bootleg game? A game that I thought was to be Pokémon Diamond. Oh no, not that one. Remember, we're talking late 90s, early 2000s here, so it would be impressive for a young me to get a copy way ahead of time, right? Well, that's what I thought back then too. Today I'm going to share the tale of a game that has haunted me since childhood. A tale of two friends who couldn't understand the concept of surrender despite how stacked the odds were against them. This is the story of Pokémon Diamond, Special Pikachu Edition. While this story is based on true events, it has been slightly altered for the sake of privacy. As usual, I will link all the sources and assets I've used to make this video down below. I will also be discussing the subjects of piracy, emulation and game preservation, all for educational purposes. Of course, I have to mention that all of this falls under fair use, just covering all bases in case the Nintendo lawyers get a bit too excited. If you like what you see here, please give this a like and maybe consider subbing to my channel, I'd really appreciate it. So, let's don our backward caps, pin on your gym badges, and let's catch some bootlegs. Enjoy!
Bootlegs, I choose you!
My first exposure to Pokemon, much like everyone else, was through the anime. I really wanted to catch them all, and by that I mean the toys. Are you noticing a pattern here? I actually didn't realise that it's based on a game until my friend showed me his copy of Pokemon Blue. I just had to get it. My poor parents, who are still suffering PTSD from the Great Megazord hunt of '93, had to put up with my begging to no end. Wait until we get to the Philippines, my mother would say in a very irritable tone. Every 2 years around the Christmas season, we'd fly over to the Philippines to visit family. It was also a great time to get myself some video games. You see, the 90s were also the time of the PlayStation, and with family over in the Philippines, we had access to a lot of PS1 games, for very, very cheap. I'm talking about getting Final Fantasy VIII on release for £1 back then, which was quite a steal. Literally. I didn't realise till much later that the stores in the Philippines were in fact selling pirated copies. But younger me didn't care. I'd load up my hot new game on my modded PlayStation and have a blast. On top of that, the Philippines would be getting game releases early, so I'd get to play these games way ahead of everyone else here in the UK. Now with these copies being pirated, I'd run into a few hiccups. For example, I never completed Final Fantasy IX because the game would freeze right at the tail end of Disc 1. Being the dumb kid that I was, I thought I had to replay the game, expecting a different result. I must have replayed Disc 1 around maybe 10 times. Look, I was very stubborn back then. During Christmas 1998, we went back to the Philippines. Coincidentally, it was my birthday around that time too, so my uncle gifted me a legit copy of Pokémon Red. And man, I spent the rest of my vacation glued to that Game Boy screen. If you've been to the Philippines, you would understand the appeal of its beautiful scenery, warm weather, the friendly locals, and the fantastic barbecues. Instead, I was trying my best to become a Pokemon master. I remember one day we were at a family gathering, But because I couldn't understand the language, I wasn't really that invested in what was going on around me. I was too busy fighting the gym leader Brock for a chance to win the Boulder Badge. My dad, who was also not as invested in the party, was watching me play from the sidelines, cheering me on. As we got home after the holidays, everyone at school was crazy for Pokémon. We collected the cards with no idea on how to play them, shared tips and secrets on how to catch all the Pokémon. It was the first time we heard of the Missing No glitch, along with its duplication powers. And of course, there were the playground rumours. Like how to find Mew under a truck, trying to catch that infamous Pikachu, and how to revive Aerith from death. Oh, wait a minute. And then came whispers of Pokémon Gold and Silver. A lot of us were speculating on the new starters. We were spending pocket money on gaming mags in hopes of finding anything new. And then, in '99, one of our friends managed to get a copy of Gold, way before it was announced that it was coming to the West. That friend was the coolest kid in school. However, there was one problem. The game was all in Japanese. Didn't really matter though. We all just huddled around him and watched as he caught the new Pokémon, including that little Pikachu, of which we'd find out later that its actual name was Marill. It wouldn't be till the 2000s when we get a localized version of Gold and Silver, so we all had to wait for a little bit while longer. Around that time I spent another Christmas in one of the hottest countries on Earth. During a trip to the Mall of Asia, we checked out one of the game stores, and that's when I saw it. Through the glass case I saw a Game Boy cartridge with the words, Pokémon Diamond. I couldn't believe it. Pokémon Diamond? But didn't Gold and Silver just come out? Maybe it's an updated version, much like with Pokémon Yellow. I mean, the words Special Pikachu Edition are printed right there underneath the title. Either way, I had to get this game. I wanted to be the first in school to get the newer Pokémon game, to become the cool kid. My parents weren't as sure, but I was so excited they couldn't say no. And besides, the game was really cheap, so it wasn't like they were losing out on anything. As we made it back to the family home, I dashed into the guest bedroom we were staying in, slotted the cartridge into my Game Boy, and was welcomed to... This couldn't be real, right? How could this be Pokemon? I don't get it. Let's take a look at the intro to the game. Right off the bat, you're welcome to a montage of extremely compressed images of Pokemon, followed by portraits of all your favourite characters, such as Jin, Shiny, Gun? What? Rocket? Well, that makes sense. Uncle? Who's Uncle? Umi? Huh? Ah yes, my favourite character. Tim. The game itself plays like a near impossible version of Mario, with very tight precise platforming, but with stiff yet slippery controls, way beyond what my tiny mind can comprehend. Why does this game look so ugly? Why am I collecting Pokeballs? Just what kind of Pokemon is that? Ah, and now I'm green. Great. This was way before ROM hacks like Kaizo Mario, mind you. Though, with Kaizo they already had a solid base game with tight controls. Meanwhile, this game controlled as if you were trying to climb up a water slide where they replaced the water with tar. It's as frustrating as you could imagine. At the time, I didn't understand the concept of bootlegs, pirated copies or ROM hacks. But even then, I knew deep down I was ripped off. Even when it was cheap, it was still an embarrassment. Just what was I going to do? Tell my parents that I wanted to take this game back after making such a big deal out of buying it in the first place? They bought it for me after all when they didn't really need to. I felt like I just wasted their money. So I stashed it in my bag out of embarrassment. When my dad asked me about the game, I just gave a, yeah, it's good. I think he probably knew what was up in some way. After all, I spent all that holiday actually going outside instead of being glued to my Game Boy. I didn't even learn my lesson from that either. Years later, I got myself a bootleg Dragon Ball Z game for the GBA called Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu, and it was from the same exact store. I mean, look at this. What is this supposed to be? I can't believe they got away with... What? What do you mean this is an official game? So the moment we flew back home, I slunk into my room and tossed that diamond in the rough into my desk drawer, never to be seen again. In a cruel twist of fate, this special game was what caused me to lose interest in Pokemon. At least, until a few years later.
Bootleg Battle Beatdown.
It was the early to mid 2000s. By that time I was hitting college. And along with me was a good friend of mine. Let's call him Jay. By this point, the Nintendo DS and PlayStation Portable were just released, with the next-gen consoles right around the corner. It was also around that time that Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green came out for the Game Boy Advance, remakes of the first pair of Pokémon games. It was an exciting time back then. A lot of us were hyped up for the new releases. As for Jay, he was personally looking forward to the PlayStation 3. But instead, he started coming into college with his Game Boy Color and a copy of the original Pokémon Red. This was before the popularity of retro gaming really took off, so back then we would tease him mercilessly for playing an old game. We'd call him out for being behind on the times, acting childish, being cheap, or, at worst, call him old. It never really affected him though, he'd just laugh it off and get back to capturing one of the legendaries. With Christmas around the corner, we'd talk about getting each other some gifts, something fun or jokey for the holidays. So an idea sparked in my head. I went home, dug around my drawers and found it. Pokémon Diamond, Special Pikachu Edition. As my friend unwrapped his present, he gave it an odd look before bursting into laughter. I eventually told him my personal tale, and we spent the 3 periods playing that game. Even when we were older, we couldn't exactly wrap our heads around the difficulty. Back then I thought it was just me being a dumb kid, but no, the game was near impossible. We kept dying over and over to cheap deaths and slippery platforms. It was so bad that we were stuck on the very first level, and yet, we were having fun? It was like one of those so bad it's good type situations. To disbelieve that this game was even made in the first place would send us into complete hysterical laughter. As the day neared its end, I thought we'd be done with it. A fun novelty while it lasted. But something triggered within Jay. The type of feeling inside where you need to conquer something difficult, something challenging, something that seemed to be impossible at first until you start noticing the cracks. A feeling that resonates within all gamers. A feeling that still hangs with us to this day.
Ooh, we are where we want to be. Oh, Jesus.
Jay wanted to get over that hurdle, beat the first level and see what awaits him after, to see the rest of the game. He was set to take on the Special Pikachu challenge. days on end he played the game. He spent free periods and lunch breaks trying to beat that level to no avail. We would hear his screams of frustration down the hallway and immediately knew what was going on. When he got home, the first thing he did was switch on his Game Boy Color, be greeted by that terrible music, and kept trucking on. There were some days where each of us would take turns, but we weren't dedicated enough to go all the way. All except one. Jay eventually gained an ally in his fight against the special Pikachus. Here comes along a guy by the name of Gary, a horror movie buff with aspirations to make his own B-movies. Our very own Sam Raimi. So his experience in horror would obviously come in handy in this situation, considering the game's more than traumatic difficulty. Every 3 periods, the two would find an empty classroom and press on against their own personal Goliath. Hours turned into days and days turned into weeks. Time continues to pass on by. The two would switch turns on figuring out how to get past the first level. They would strategize, remember enemy placements, when to jump, where to jump, which platforms lead to where, how to compensate for its sticky controls and momentum. The rest of college caught wind of it, and students wanted to see the game for themselves. Some even wanting to give it a try. Eventually they ended up cheering on the dynamic duo. Then, during one fateful lunch break, we all heard it. Not the sounds of desperate cries or frustrated screams. Instead, victory chants were heard coming from one of the classrooms, followed by high fives and congratulations to one another. And then, dead silence. Our group of friends were concerned. Jay and Gary didn't come out of the classroom. You would think they would come dashing out to show us their progress. You know, show the next level. So I went and checked in on them. As it turned out, the moment they finally got to the end of the level, Was this it? Was this entire game just one level? Was this the special Pikachu the duo were fighting for? Was this even worth it? I can't imagine how much of a slap in the face that was, especially when the two of them invested so much time and energy into this endeavour. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe if they played the game all over again, they'd get a better result. An actual working ending? Because that worked so well for me back then, right? Right? Technically, yes, they beat the level, and to a certain extent they beat the game. But the victory still rings hollow. Still, we couldn't help but laugh out loud at the absurdity of it all. Months later, Jay's birthday came around, and I thought I'd give him a copy of the GBA port of Zelda: A Link to the Past. It was the least I could do for the suffering I inflicted on the poor guy. But man, we came away from it with quite the story, that's for sure.
Pikachu in the rough.
Alright, so what was the deal with this game anyway? I've seen other people cover the wild world of Pokémon bootlegs, but they never seem to have reached this one. As it turns out, it's not just a bootleg of a Pokémon game. Oh no, it's a bootleg of a Mario game, Mario 3 Special. The big difference is that they removed the map screen and only used one of the levels. So we're left with this Frankenstein monster of a game, and yet I'm still impressed that they managed to put it on a physical cartridge and it actually runs on official Nintendo hardware. After playing this game for the video, I have to admit, I had a lot of fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a terrible game in so many ways. After all these years, I can finally articulate my experience with this game and why it gave me and my friends so much trouble. As I mentioned before, this is a bootleg of a Mario game, so it carries over some of the mechanics you expect from the Mario series. Much like with the original, it appears you can build up momentum the longer you hold down the directional input, causing Pikachu to sprint. Sounds good on paper, except this bootleg managed to find a way to mess up such a simple concept. For one thing, the moment you begin to sprint, you barely have much control over your Pikachu. He just zaps to the extreme, so to speak. The momentum itself appears to be inconsistent. I swear there are moments where I would lightly tap the pad to the right, and Pikachu just decides to sprint to his death. On top of that, there's barely any air control. Once you do a running jump and you screw up by a tiny fraction, there's no saving yourself. You can try pressing the opposite side of the directional pad to slow him down, but there's a 50-50 chance of him stopping because there's input lag. I press whatever buttons I can to try wrangling the speeding Pikachu, but 9 times out of 10 he won't behave and fall to his death. There are points where I build up momentum for a sprinting jump and yeah, the jump button doesn't respond. It doesn't really matter in the end too, because here comes the third problem. With such small platforms, there's actually not much room to start sprinting, and when you do, it's by accident, leading to the never-ending Pokémon pit. Enemies behave as they do in Mario, you jump on them and they die. Seems sound, except if you were to walk back where you first encountered them, they respawn. So say you wanted to get a good idea of your surroundings, and wanted to do a bit of exploring, you'd walk a pixel back, and suddenly, an enemy just kills you. And I have no idea what the deal with this one enemy is. He just flickers in and out of existence, as if he's in some sort of hellish limbo. The Pokeballs replace the coins in the game, of course, and if you collect 100 you gain a life. Fortunately, this mechanic actually works. I mean, there's no way to screw that up. You need all the lives you're gonna get for this challenge. Except, when you die, you start all the way back to the start of the level. There's no mid-level checkpoints. I know it sounds kinda nitpicky, especially in the long run. If this was any other Mario game, the first level wouldn't really require checkpoints of the sort. Instead, you'd be stacking up lives with the levels up ahead. But remember, this one level is the game. So say you manage to do well for a while and collect an extra life. Once you die, you start back all over again, minus the extra life. You pretty much made no progress. You'd be trapped in a never-ending limbo. An Ouroboros Special Pikachu Edition. There's power-ups, of course. Instead of mushrooms, you pick up what appears to be a thunderstone, and Pikachu evolves into the incredible Hulkachu. I can't understand the logic of making him green. Did the bootleggers forget Raichu was a thing? Were they afraid that if they changed Pikachu too much they wouldn't be able to fool the gullible kids? I'm pretty sure that cover art was good enough to fool someone like me. Or maybe they're just that dedicated to the title of Special Pikachu Edition. So I covered this game along with retelling my personal story, and I thought I was done then. But as I researched further, an unfortunate discovery crashes down on top of me.
Hey Ron. Hey Billy.
As it turns out, there's another Special Pikachu Edition, this time dubbed as Jade version. I've already fallen down this rabbit hole, so I might as well see if there's any difference when compared to Diamond. Right off the bat, we get an altered version of the intro, followed by our favourite characters once again, including some new ones. But this time we get a story, oh boy. Let's check out the in-depth lore. Pikachu and the other pocket monsters join together. Suddenly they meet a desperate storm. On one hand, on the other hand, they have to try their best efforts to save the storm before Jeez. What's the deal here? Do you gotta go fast or something? Well, actually, yeah. This is actually a bootleg of a Sonic game. I recognise that music anywhere, even in its crispy, garbled state. Despite being a completely different game, it somehow still has the same stiffness and awkwardness as Diamond, only this time they carried over the mechanics of Sonic instead of Mario. And they couldn't even get that right either. How is that possible? For example, I tried to spin dash into an enemy only to get hit. On top of that, there's a lot of wonkiness when it comes to the enemy hitboxes. If I were to give some credit, at least you can see some Pokemon being represented. As I was playing this for the video, I eventually reached a point where I got hit and it crashed the game. At that point, I knew I had my share of Jade. I wasn't really prepared to go through the hassle like I did with Diamond. So instead, I'm going to cite a quick review from Handheld Underground, a website dedicated to documenting all these pirated treasures. This game even shares a few more similarities with Diamond. It starts you on the far hardest level, with lots of precision platforming. One jump is apparently impossible unless you lure one of the polygons from further back in the stage and bounce off it, and once again, it's f***ing broken, and you can't pass stage 1. This time, it just crashes when you touch the sign at the end. Jesus Christ. Well, those were certainly some special Pikachus. Despite all the flaws and goofiness, I'd still recommend checking them out. I even go as far to call them diamonds in the rough. I mean, I guess you could say that my exposure to them probably rattled a few things in my head, but when I think back to all the fond memories I had with my friends trying to beat that game, I'd say that balances out. So, I thought the video would end here. I told my story, I covered both special Pikachus to the best of my ability. Little did I know, I'd get another surprise right around the corner. Here is Pokémon Diamond and Jade, and here are the special Pikachu versions of the games. All 4 of these are bootleg games. That's right, we're dealing with 2 different versions of 2 different bootlegs. Okay, so this video is already longer than I expected, but please hang in there as I try to explain the following. If you were a Pokemon fan, you probably already heard about the infamous Diamond and Jade, which were bootlegs of a game series called Ketai Denju Telefang. If that were the case, you were probably confused that the bootleg Diamond copy I was playing was far different than what you were expecting. Funnily enough, when I went to research for this video, I felt the same way but in reverse. Ketai Denju Telefang, or Mobile Phone Beast Telefang in English, is an RPG similar to Pokemon, where instead of catching monsters, you're collecting phone numbers of creatures known as Denju. Then you can call upon them to battle. I can kinda see what the pirates were trying to achieve by selling these off as Pokemon games, but they could have at least tried harder. Not even the box art is safe from piracy. As it turns out, the creatures used on the cover aren't even Denju or Pokemon. It's amazingly cheeky how much they thought they could get away with it. And just like any bootleg game, it appears that these games have an array of glitches and game-breaking bugs. For example, dialing Secret Denju causes the game to crash. This makes it impossible to obtain Secret Denju without cheat codes. Selecting prop when no items are present causes the game to crash. Pressing A, B, select and start simultaneously causes the game to crash. On normal Game Boy games, this makes the game produce a soft reset. Pressing start after the game over screen causes the game to crash. Rapidly pressing B somewhere in the phone menu screen sometimes causes the game to crash. How this happens exactly is currently unknown. The colour palette is glitched in the introduction. Credits are removed and just has a modified "Thank you for your playing" text. What? All of this and more is sourced from the Telefang wiki. Yes, a wiki. The biggest irony of all of this is that these bootlegs spawned a bit of a following. There's even a bit of speculation that the special Pikachu editions were made to capitalize on the popularity of Diamond and Jade. So here we have two bootlegs trying to rip off the popularity of two other bootlegs. It's like poetry, they rhyme. What these bootlegs ultimately achieved is to create an interest in the original games, leading to an English-speaking fanbase. Most of this info comes from an in-depth English wiki for the game, and that's pretty great. It goes to show that despite their oddities, and their need to rip off famous IPs, they have a place within our sphere. As of now, there's a site dedicated towards covering, archiving, and preserving these bootlegged wonders. The owner of Handheld Underground, Taizu, even went as far as to program his own emulator to run these mysterious marvels. If it wasn't for this site, I wouldn't be able to find the game and record footage for it. More than anything, I'm glad there's someone out there going out of their way to document all these bizarre releases over the years. Now, all of this is probably in that legal grey area. I'm not really a lawyer, so don't take my word for it. But I think it's well worth having a site like this to document something as crazy as these bootlegs. A piece of history, so to speak. A legacy of bizarre games that have tricked grandmas and dumb kids like me. In the lead up to this video, I got in contact with Taizu. I was concerned that by speaking about this, Nintendo might come around and bang down his doors. Fortunately, he assured me that it's fine to talk about it. After all, he's been running this site for over 10 years, and no one's really bothered him. So I took the opportunity to ask about how he came to run such a website, and to share his story. I've been interested in bootleg games for a long time really. I live in the UK where they were never widely sold, so I rarely came across them in person, but it fascinated me to know that there was this whole other hidden side to console gaming that was, at the time, barely documented at all. Meanwhile, I'd also been interested in computers and the web from a young age, so it was only natural the two interests would converge at some point, and I'd end up starting a website on the topic. So in 2006, I started a site intended to cover gaming obscurities in general, but it tilted towards bootleg stuff in the end as my interest developed in that direction. Handheld Underground spun off from that in 2012, when I started getting into ROM dumping, which was something I never really thought I'd do until I discovered just how many unlicensed Game Boy games were still undumped. From there, I quickly discovered that just ROM dumping them wasn't enough, since most of them were copy protected too, and so I ended up having to develop an emulator to play them as well. It's been a long journey to say the least. I then asked for his insights into the subject of game preservation. Yeah, ultimately emulation and ROM dumps are the only practical way that games for dead platforms can be preserved and made playable for the long term. We can't rely on the finite number of out-of-production consoles and increasingly rare and expensive original software. Of course, there's a bigger debate on official versus unofficial preservation that gets conflicted with this sometimes, since people often associate emulation and ROMs with piracy. But ultimately, the vast majority of official re-releases are using the exact same techniques. They're two sides of the same coin really. My ideal would be if unofficial and official efforts could exist in a symbiotic rather than an adversarial relationship. But we're way off that yet, in spite of some positive work here and there. Of course, when it comes to bootleg games, an official release is impossible because they were never official in the first place. Even if you tracked down the creator of Pokémon Diamond Special Pikachu Edition and they agreed to do a re-release, you still wouldn't be able to legitimately put it out without the Pokémon company's consent, which you're very unlikely to get. So really, the only way these games can persist is through underground efforts like my own, which I think is fitting, considering the way they came into the world in the first place. I really want to thank Taisu for giving me a bit of his time to share his insight, as well as running this website for 10 years now. I really appreciate the work he's put into preserving these games. Without him, I wouldn't be able to revisit past memories of my bizarre youth. Please check out Handheld Underground if you're curious, and if you want more, also check out Taisu's main site, 12-Bit Club, where he documents all kinds of weird gaming oddities. With retro game collecting hitting its peak, especially with the recent controversy surrounding the grading of retro games, I wouldn't be surprised if there are collectors out there who are mad enough to find physical copies of these bootlegs. And hey, as a fellow collector, more power to you. But for now, the best way we can get access to these games are from the internet. While we have our bootlegs and pirated copies of the past, I'd always be amused to see the trades continue to this day. I can't count the amount of times I've seen mobile ads for unofficial Pokémon apps. Even with its ups and downs, the Pokémon franchise continues to stand tall, with a very dedicated and passionate fanbase. Even when I dropped off after Gen 1, I'd still catch a video or two of people playing the game or covering it, whether it be challenge runs like Nuzlocke, card pack openings, or someone doing a 3-hour longman review of a recent Pokémon game. And after all of that, I sometimes wonder if Jay is still a fan of the franchise. I wonder if he still has Pokémon Diamond. I wonder if he thought about his time with it as much as I have. Or maybe he just left it behind in some box somewhere. But one thing that wouldn't be left behind is our story of Pokémon Diamond, Special Pikachu Edition. Hello again. Thought I'd make a shorter video this time round, and as you may have noticed, I bumped up the quality of my audio. I ended up buying a new mic just for this endeavour. I wanted to give a massive thanks to Taisu once again for sparing his time to talk to me. I'll be sure to link his site and more down below. And, if you're feeling brave, try giving these special Pikachu editions a go. I think it would be funny to see someone come up with a speedrun for it at least. Also, let me know in the comments down below if you had any bootleg stories of your own. I'd be interested to see if anyone had any similar experiences to mine. I wanted to thank those who have watched and left a like or comment on my previous video. I really appreciate it because it was something that hit close to home to me, not to mention it was my very first video. Now that said, it would be a good time to provide a bit of an update to the Mighty story. In it, I mentioned an author by the name of Ritzabel, who was the translator of the Father of Light and producer of Light's blog series, while now she goes by a VTuber by the name of VMimi. She was very kind enough to share her perspective of Mighty, as well as her insight into the Japanese Final Fantasy XIV community as a whole. What's also amazing is that Mimi got in contact with Mighty. Considering how protective Japanese companies and the like are over their IPs, Mimi wanted to make sure if it was alright to translate the blog entries. So she sent Mighty a Twitter DM and he actually responded. Nice to meet you. Thank you for translating my work for the Warriors of Light overseas. It means a lot. On September 2nd, 2017, Mighty wrote a blog entry making a call for translators. With the Father of Light's TV series hitting overseas through Netflix, Mighty wanted his original works to be translated for a foreign audience. In the very same entry, he mentions that someone has already translated it, but he wanted to develop it further. Considering that Mimi started translating his work early 2017, I think there's a strong possibility that he saw her blog and got inspired. Now what he wanted to further develop is, I assume, bringing the book to an overseas audience or maybe translating his blog into many other languages. It goes to show how forward-thinking he was at the time. I have a personal theory, and it's a bit of a shot in the dark, so please stick with me on this. Naoki Yoshida, the producer of Final Fantasy XIV, said that Mighty would kind of communicate through his blog. Just to reiterate, Yoshida would read Mighty's blog, and Mighty would notice traffic coming in from Square, so in response he'd write about how he's still playing Final Fantasy XIV. Just a roundabout way of acknowledging Yoshida's presence. So when Mighty mentioned that someone has already translated his Father of Light series, I wonder if he did that to let Mimi know that he noticed her work. I have no idea if that actually was the case, but it's a really nice thought. I also want to thank Mimi for providing her voice for the title cards of this very video. I'm sure at the time of her recording those lines it's made next to no sense, but I really appreciate it. You can catch Mimi on Twitch, where she primarily streams Final Fantasy XIV, with some art streams on the side. It's a very laid back atmosphere, and you might be able to see me in the chat from time to time.
Like, I boil the water. Maybe I should do it where I don't boil it all the way, where it turns... So, my electric kettle, turns itself off when it's too hot. Does it? Wait, let me see. Is it covered up by the Japanese sticker? Hold on. It says, just add water. Gradually stir 180 milliliters hot, not boil... Oh, shit. It says not boiling.
Be sure to sub to her YouTube as well. I highly recommend her Meme Hunt series, where she translates FF14 memes from the Japanese community. Really good stuff. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make any more videos. My main goal was to tell Mighty's story and then just leave. But since then I've met a few new friendly faces and thought I'd give this YouTube thing a go. I wanted to share some new friends some old stories they may not have known about, as well as remind old friends of the fun times. I'll make a few more videos in this length, maybe shorter, before I tackle another long form video like the Mighty documentary. Maybe something a bit special to me, who knows. I can't give an ETA on this of course because I'm still pretty new at this, but I appreciate your patience. And if you enjoyed your time here, feel free to sub to this channel. If you want to keep up with me, I have a Twitter you can follow for future updates. On top of that, I recently opened up an Instagram where I'll be posting my artwork along with the thumbnails I've been using for my videos. Until then, thank you for watching, take it easy, and thank you for your playing. Take care.
I'm fine. No. Don't move. Why put a hole in the ceiling? Don't move.